All right, welcome everyone. I just want to make sure my audio is working. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
All right, well,
Yes.
I look forward to the conversation today. And so what I want to do is to kind of share some big ideas about teaching and learning around culture and how they matter. But I need this to be a conversation. So feel free to interject. Feel free to stop me. I want to make sure that we have lots of time for questions. So I'll try to be brief. And so I'm going to share my screen now, and let's jump into the conversation. The first thing I want to say is that one of the things that happened to me was I decided to translate about 15 years of work that I was doing as a researcher and as a teacher into a book. And so we wrote this book, Science in the City. Now, I want to draw your attention to the bottom half of this discussion, culturally relevant STEM education. Now, I did not choose that. That comes from the publisher, and it comes from the publisher because the publisher was trying to sell books, right? So I would not necessarily characterize it as culturally relevant education. Let me explain why. The argument you hear, even from Gloria Latz and Billings Geneva Gay, is that culturally relevant pedagogy or teaching culturally relevant is simply good teaching. So the argument is what constitutes culturally irrelevant teaching, right? So no one, I would argue that we should teach in an irrelevant way. And so the subtext of what I originally had as a title was language, cognition, and culture. And so I really want to sell a product today. And here's the product, right? The way that our brain works are wrapped around cultural things, right? So I want to argue that culture, or the necessity of engaging in the place that I live, is a vital aspect of teaching and learning that we all intuitively know, but it should be a part of our everyday decision-making as teachers. And so with that said, let me just jump in. I want to argue first, there's been a huge shift in what happened, a quiet revolution. So for example, the thing that flipped and opened, we used to call that a phone, but you called people on those things, right? The thing on the right is called a smartphone. But I've been told, don't call me, text me if you need to reach out to me. More importantly, probably spend more time reading and doing other things on that than I actually use it as a phone. There was a quiet revolution that happened. Similarly, there was a time where we drove in taxi cabs, right? There was a time when Uber was a thing. We jumped in the back of a car. I'm not sure if that's going to last. I don't feel comfortable necessarily jumping in a stranger's car, but you think about it, before it was an irrational idea to say, I'm going to have a stranger come up to my house, I'll jump in the car and I'll have them take me somewhere. And that became Uber and Lyft. It was a quiet revolution. So here's what happened. Classrooms used to look like this. Students sitting in line with their books in front of them, and a well-disciplined and managed classroom meant every student behaved quietly and in rows. This is a modern version of that, and unfortunately looks exactly the same. But I think the revolution that has happened in modern classrooms has been very subtle and almost invisible to us, right? So even though the pictures look the same, something dramatically has changed. And so I want to go to learning. So for example, culturally, this is what I mean by cultural cognition. There was a point in time when I remembered everyone's phone numbers. If you asked me what was my friend Daryl's phone number, I could say 510-777-9311. I remember the numbers in the chat. Tell me, why is it that we don't remember phone numbers? I'm going to put the chat up really quickly. What happened to this? We don't use them, correct? Give me some other ideas. The phone remembers for us. Good, love it. A couple more ideas and I'll feel happy. What happened? Does it uniformly happen to most of us? Come on, Vermont, I need one more. There we go. I don't know the numbers because I don't need to know them. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now, here, I want to take you back and suggest that, here we go. Something that's really powerful about this process is no one had to tell us to delete this information, right? We just did it naturally. I'm going to give you another example. For example, turn-by-turn directions. There was a time if you said, okay, I want you to come by for dinner, take exit 14. You're going to make a right at the Chevron gas station. I'm not sure if you have Chevron or what, Sunflower, whatever your gas station is, BP. Make a right at the BP. You're going to go down 3 blocks, make a left, and then you make 2 rights on Anderson Street, and then you're there. We don't remember turn-by-turn directions either. And here's why. Because we don't need them. We don't use them. The computers on our shoulders are fundamentally efficient devices. And what they do is delete any information that we do not use. I'm going back to this idea of culturally relevant pedagogy or culture and cognition. Here's what that means. In the culture that we exist, we retain and know deeply the things that we talk the most about. So let me say it differently. The things I talk the most about are the things I know most deeply. So here goes the question. That picture of the 2 classrooms. Who is doing the talking? Put that in the chat for me really quick so I don't feel like I'm talking to myself, right? In the classroom environment, who does most of the talking? Someone says the teacher. So someone else says the teacher. Give me something else. Who's doing the talking? The students. Good. Give me something else. It should be the students for sure. I like that one because it should be suggest that that's not what's really happening. And that's what I was doing as a teacher until my mentor teacher said, bro, you need to shut up, man. You talk too much. Your kids are never going to learn. They got to be comfortable if they offer the wrong answer. So we create an environment where, here, let me just say this. You come to chemistry, you come to biology, you come to science class in middle school because you don't know. The teacher then asks you a bunch of questions about the very thing that you don't know. And then only the person who has the right answer is permitted the opportunity to offer their ideas. It doesn't make sense. More importantly, it goes against the culture of learning, right? The idea that the things we talk about most are the things we know most about. And here's why. We're in a learning environment where we are not comfortable with the wrong answer. Here's what I learned. Right now, if you ask a kid to understand some idea, so first of all, these phones they've caused us to change the culture of how we think. It's not the human brain is changed, but if I have access to any information, then I won't retain it because I don't need it. Same principle you told me about, right? So if I'm a student and I want to know about hydrogen bonding, for example, what will I do? I want you to take a look at this picture. A couple things I want you to note. On the right is 146,000 views. Now, this is a video recorded by one of my students to explain what hydrogen bonding is. Why in the world would it have 146,000 views? And here's the answer. When students don't understand, step one, let me find a YouTube video that will explain this for me. Therefore, if I need the information, I'm going to go get it in video. And that is a new phenomenon. So what that also means is I'm unlikely to have that idea as mastered unless I talk about it all the time. So I think you know where I'm heading. I'm arguing that we have to keep our kids talking, right? More importantly, right, this becomes a new learning tool. And so I want us to think about how are we using the ways that students are making sense of the world so that they're learning more efficiently. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second. So big idea, how we access knowledge has changed, right? You Google it, right? Your kids will never know the joy and pain of a library search, index cards, right? I had to go to the library to look up information, to get the index card, to hunt for the book, to Xerox copy the book, to read the book, to get the information. That has fundamentally changed. Everything is at the palm of their hands, and we need to change how we teach accordingly, right? So here we go. New information requires teaching that recognizes this change. Is very subtle. And I'm going to give you the answer right now because you already know the answer. The answer is I got to get them talking about it when they leave. I need to get them talking about it in the classroom. And most importantly, I need them to talk about it, write about it, explain it in the classroom, and be comfortable not having the right answer, because why would they have the right answer in the first place? Last thing here, our brains have not changed, but our access to knowledge has changed. So our teaching has to reflect the modern culture of culture and cognition. I hope that makes sense. So here we go. So science, now, if you haven't noticed, is serving a vital role in making sense of our world. I guarantee you, if you ask your kids about how viruses work, they have a depth of knowledge now, because the necessity of living in our modern world provides a necessity for explanation. They can talk to you now about viruses. They can talk to you now about antibodies. They're probably pretty adept right now at talking about how viruses duplicate, replicate, and have mutations. It is now a part of our modern day living, and I can guarantee you that I have some expertise there, right? Now, new generation science standards, and I will give them credit. They said before the pandemic broke out, we were struggling to make sense of standards. They shifted the approach. They said instead of students explaining ideas and facts, we want to move to our capacity to reason. We want to make sure students can say, this is why this is right, and the alternative therefore must be true. It's a powerful resource, particularly be given that students they have access to more information, but they also have access to more incorrect information than ever before. Therefore, we need to make sure we're preparing our students to understand. And here's the answer. Understanding is rooted in the culture of the kids, meaning the things that they see most often are the things that they will talk most about. Quick example before we jump in. When you go to a grocery store, in the chat, please, in Vermont, do they have it's gonna sound weird, but our grocery stores here, they spray the vegetables, right? And some grocery stores, they spray the vegetables and there's a thunder and lightning sound. Does that happen in Vermont? Anyone have seen that happen before? In the chat, right? The sprayed vegetables, okay. As soon as Jennifer says, nope, no thunder and lightning. All right, never seen it, only in New York, okay. Sprayed vegetables, they spray the vegetables, they just don't give you the thunder sound, correct? All right, some people will say yes. All right, we're all over it. So here's my point, right? The vegetables are dead, good people. I know they're dead. You know they're dead. No sound effects in Ohio, got it. But the vegetables have been, they're not alive. So why are they spraying the vegetables in the grocery store? And I know why, you know why. Here's why they're spraying the vegetables, because if I want to sell them, I need them to look like they're alive, right? So why will we spray the vegetables at the grocery store? Because the water will move across the tiny holes in the vegetables and they will look fresher than they actually are. It is the story of osmosis in their lived experience, right? I would argue most scientists would not think of that as culturally relevant pedagogy. This idea of, I'm not going to teach them osmosis. I'm going to teach them the story of why they are spraying the vegetables in the grocery store, because every time they go into the grocery store, sound effects or not, I want them to be the local expert in their family to say, you know, these vegetables are dead. They're just trying to make them look fresh. And that is why they spray the vegetables in the grocery store, right? I need us to think about, if the nature of learning, right, has changed, the nature of knowledge has changed, but the culture and the nature of our brains has not, why are we not teaching science in context? Because again, there is culturally relevant pedagogy and then there is culturally irrelevant pedagogy. It doesn't make sense to me. My point is, all the things that we know are the things we experience. And I'm going to sell a product today. Here's a product. I want you to really center putting your kids in situations where they can see the phenomena, because that's how it's going to be the thing that is pertinent to them anyway. So quickly, I wrote a book about it. And part of it was rooted in this picture. And I'll get to this quickly. This is James Meredith, 1965 in Mississippi. And I saw this picture and I said, holy smokes. The people on either side of Mr. Meredith here, he was trying to integrate the schools in Mississippi. They're there to help him. That's his security team. And no one looks happy, right? The people behind him are there. And they are his security or there. And then there's some people there to just boo him, to throw things at him, to say you shouldn't belong in a school district. And I'm not real, I mean, the university rather. And I'm not concerned about the picture, but I started to imagine, what did Tuesday look like? If he's registering this day and he goes to class on Tuesday, no security, what was his experience like? The idea was that, wow, if he wrote a paper, it had to be extraordinary, because I don't think he was getting a fair shake. If he had to answer a question in class, he had to be extraordinary, because I didn't think he was getting a fair shake, right? So this idea is called the black tax, and it's a common phrase in African-American communities. This idea is that, you know, there's some inherent inequalities in the ways we think about things. Some people are there's bias against women, there's bias against people who speak a particular way. There is inherent injustice. So given that injustice, you have to be of such a skill that you can work through this injustice. So I'm going someplace. When I thought about that, I thought about, well, how is language serving as one of these features? Let me give you a quick example. John Ball, who's a scholar, mentor of mine, he talked about language variation, and he says one form of the modern black tax, and I'm using this kind of as a macro level category, I'm not talking about black people in particular, but that we have linguistic racism and linguistic bias. So let me give you an example. There are studies to say that people prefer physicians who do not speak with thick Northern or thick Southern accents. Now think about this for a minute. If I live in Alabama, why would my physician not speak like a person from Alabama? Or if I live in upstate New York, why would my physician not speak with the accent of upstate New York. The idea is there was an association with that intelligence was not linked to New York or Southern accents, so people were biased towards us. Let me ask you this. Close your eyes, think quickly. What does an intelligent person sound like? What is that accent? So let's do this exercise. Don't write it down. Don't say it out loud, right? If you thought was, well, British accents are intelligent, you have the very same problem that I have. Someone has sold you on the idea that the culture of intelligence is the culture of a particular linguistic. You should be able to have a thick New York accent and be brilliant. You could have a thick Vermont accent and be brilliant. You should be able to have a thick Southern accent and be brilliant. And so the question is, how do we use language as a cue to communicate who we are and how intelligent a person is? There is this notion of linguistic bias that happens in US schools, is documented at great depth by linguists, but science educators don't really do it. So let me step back for a second. In science, you're getting new words, new ideas at the same time. Let me say it again. In science, you're getting new words and new ideas at the same time. But when we ask students to explain those ideas, do we hear their brilliance? Because are we listening for the new ideas communicated in scientific language that we didn't teach them? Or are we listening to how the students are able to communicate? And this is when I say communicate, I'm speaking about writing, drawing, and speaking particularly. So let me give you a quick example, and we're going to move quickly. I know this seems a little off, but we're going to the national championship football game. I believe this was like 2013, 2014. This is Jameis Winston, the quarterback of University of Florida State, excuse me. And he scores the touchdown at the last minute of the game. They win the championship, and the reporter asked him this question.
15 to go in this game. Final drive. What did you tell your teammates around you?
I said, guys, we didn't come here for no reason. I said, guys, this is ours, man. This is all the adversity we went through. The first few quarters, it was ours to take. And like I was just saying, we control our own destiny. And those men looked me in my eye and they said, we got this, Jameis. And I said, are you strong? They said, I'm strong if you strong. And I said, we strong then.
After struggling through the first half, what was the biggest adjustment you guys made at halftime?
We had to go back to playing Florida State football. We came out here, we were letting us be bigger than the game. We were bigger than the game. Then we had to say, hey, let's play Florida State football because can't nobody be bigger than this game. And we did that, and we came out victorious.
Dee McCarron, who just happens to be the mother of the quarterback of a different team, she said, am I listening to English? Also, pretty cool way to use Twitter for research. I was excited to follow this thing happening. So notice this is 12 in the morning, right after this is an immediate response to his scoring this touchdown during this interview. A few minutes later, she writes, anyone that knows our family knows that we are far from racist. My tweet was not in any way meant that way. I sincerely apologize if I offended anyone. I believe Dee McCarron, just her visceral response. Another person named Reggie Bush, famous football player, says this: love listening to this dude Jameis talk after game. Walks and talks like a true champion, a great role model for all kids to look up to, right? His response, same exact video interview rather, and he responds completely differently. There's another person, LeBron James, says this: unfreaking believable interview by James. Just shows part of the reason why he's so special. So here's what I want to take you to. How could people hear the exact same thing but have vastly different interpretations of what they were hearing? I have an argument. There's a word that I do not like in the English language. It is organic. I messed it up. Organic. Organic, I took chemistry, you took chemistry. It means you have a carbon-based structure, but that's not how we use the word organic. We use organic to mean left alone, untouched, right? As if we just let all the vegetables grow naturally, they would be as big and as round and as healthy. I don't want to get into that politically, but the idea is, what are the language norms of the classroom? I argue we've left them organic. So for example, why are we raising our hand to speak? Who created that rule? That in order to speak in the classroom, you have to raise your hand and the teacher can appoint you to. Or the one that I was burdened with as a teacher, right? You have to keep quiet in the classroom. If learning happens by explaining, and I'm making sure that every student is quiet and I'm the only one that's talking, you know who learned a lot of biology when I was teaching biology? Me, because I was doing all of the talking. So here's the issue. We, by default, value the culture of power. So the culture of power in classrooms is the traditional structure of only those who have the right answer can speak. But here's the thing. When you are asked to explain something, here's the power of a question. If I ask you, what is the outer layer of a virus? right? I mean, excuse me. I don't know why I'm stuck on viruses. I'm gonna move on. Let's talk chemistry. What is the outer layer of electrons of an atom, right? You can do three things. If I ask you that question, you can go, I don't know. And that is a powerful place to be. The power of a question is to answer in reverse. And so I've at least put you in a position where you go, I'm not quite sure. Now, if I teach you that there's research by Dr. Dan Schwartz that suggests the time for telling, having you struggle with that idea is like you punching the phone number and getting that wrong number. Some of you know the sound when you get to 222. If you got the wrong number, you focus in, and now if you're given the opportunity to get it right, you retain the information. The idea is, if you get an answer wrong, your mind won't allow you to get it wrong over and over and over again if you have access to the information. But we only give kids very few opportunities to speak and get the ideas wrong. So one way, if I ask you the question, you get it wrong, right? You know that you got it wrong. The other is that if I ask you the question, you know that you know part of it, and you know that you don't understand part of it. That's also very beneficial. It's not a binary right or wrong thing. You can see there are components of this that I have right. There are components of this that I have wrong, right? It's a valuable place to be. The third, if you get it right, I've now affirmed your confidence that you know the idea, but here's the problem for me personally. The organic and left alone language norms of classrooms, we don't allow students to do the talking. We don't allow them to get the answers wrong. In many cases, the first time you've experienced this, that students have had an opportunity to talk about it is on the test. And it is in those moments they go, I know this part, and this part is the part that I don't understand. So here's the culture of cognition and language piece. I just need them to talk about these ideas more often than not, with the comfort zone to know that if I get it wrong, it is okay. So now you just read chapters 2 and 3 of my book, because it's really what I talk about. Like, learning language is a problem, right? In the classes that I'm going to as a student, I'm getting all these new ideas. I'm getting new language simultaneously. It's challenging. At least in Spanish, I got new words for ideas that I already understood. And the teacher knew that. And the teacher would say, okay, let's just speak Spanish and do it poorly, because if you continue to practice, you'll get better. But we don't do that with our science students, right? So the argument for me is this presents a language identity dilemma. So let me explain. From a cognitive perspective, I don't understand. You've been in this situation. The teacher's blabbering complex science ideas. I just don't get it. There's a failure to understand. The second is students might have the right answer, but they explain it in the language that the teacher does not recognize. And I don't mean speaking Spanish or French. I'm saying this. If you ask them about something and they're talking about the grippiness of something, they may not ever use the word friction, but the idea can be right, but they're not expressing it in science language. So here's the question. Do we hear the brilliance of young people if we expect them to sound like scientists and use the scientific language that we haven't taught them? This next component of it is an emotional response. I can get frustrated by the jargon of academic environments, right? And finally, there's an identity piece. I don't speak like this, so I'm not supposed to be here. There is no reason for any of us to have accents. Let me make this argument. We have accents because it is great to sound like grandma, right? I'm from Northern California. So if someone says it's hella cold outside, I'm like, my people, you're speaking my language. I can hear the accent. I can hear this local identity. We speak with accents because it is a endearing component of who we are. So now you put a kid in an environment where you're teaching new ideas and new language, where we're making no affordances for the science language, we can frustrate them and get them confused and send them a message that they don't belong. So quick example of how this plays out. So I did a study several years ago. I'm a researcher, by the way, so I'm gonna show you some quick research and we'll get to the pragmatics of what you might do as a teacher. I asked the kids to explain the science of curveballs, right? Now, if you throw a baseball, you can see the red arrow, ball's going that direction and it's spinning. The pink arrow indicates where it is spinning. On the top of the ball, the seams are pushing against the airflow. But on the bottom of the ball, the seams and the airflow are the same direction. So there's greater pressure on top of the ball than on the bottom of the ball, causes the ball to dive dramatically. Now, this is called the Magnus effect, or it's air pressure differential. It is the same reason why we put spoilers on the back of sports cars, or it is how we get lift on airplanes, right? You adjust the air pressure so that you can move the object up or down. So quickly, I'm going to play a quick interview of a young person explaining the concept of how a curveball curves.
Well, when you flick the ball, it cuts through the air. It has different airs under it and over it, and starts pressing it down. so it drops, and the air on the bottom is more loose in the right way, and it just like the heavy.
All right,
pressure
good
makes it
people.
drop.
I've been talking too much. I need your help. Here's my question for you. Is he right or is he wrong? Put it in the chat. All right. Someone says matches what you non-committal answer, but a good answer. Is he right or is he wrong? This person says matches what you said and the diagram. Okay. Right. Airs equals pressure. Okay. Good. Good. Other answers. He has the basics down. Good. He didn't use the language. Good. I would say mostly right. Didn't help him make it more right language. Yeah. Good. Has to do with the speed and resulting pressure. Absolutely. Good. Yes. Has the right and wrong. Partially right. Okay. Good. 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 Now, the concept is right, but the words could be counted wrong. There we go. So now we have an added layer. Now, on a test, he has no chance. Not going to do well because unless we ask without the scientific words, right? But part of what I'm arguing today is we are actually teaching them the language of science. And anytime you want to learn a language, don't you have to go practice it? So when all I'm asking us to do is to break this binary thinking of the language and the idea being the same thing. And if he says, fix the ball has different airs under it and over it, I want to go, well, what do you mean different airs under it? First of all, that is a brilliant answer, but what do you mean? If he means there's nitrogen on top and carbon on the bottom, he's got it wrong. If he means the air is pushing differently on top and the bottom, brilliant, because now all I need to do is give you the word to say, you know what you just described, the air pushing on the top and the bottom, that's what we talk about as scientists. We call that air pressure differential. Now let's use air pressure differential as you continue to have this discussion. Now, this young person gets affirmed for the brilliance that they share, and we're giving them an opportunity to practice the science language. Remember, unless I talk about it anyway, I am not going to master it. So how do we expect anyone to remember something we don't give them practice doing, right? Now, here's what's phenomenal to me. Why would anybody know that? It is illogical. So he must have really explored the idea of why a curveball curved for him to get to this answer anyway. No one taught him this. So the idea is richly understood, right? I want to celebrate the brilliance of young people and then give them additional tools to go beyond, right? So I think you see where I'm headed. So we developed the teaching approach and said, look, why don't we try this? I was working in Detroit with a teacher there. Why don't we just teach the simple language first and then give them lots of practice activities using the science language to see if they learn better. I want you to see what science instruction looks like without the words. And so this is an osmosis lesson taught in context. And here's why I want to teach it in context. We assumed through a pre-assessment that many of the kids had fish bowls in their house, right? And so I wanted to change that. Anytime you saw a fish bowl, I wanted you to see osmosis. I mean, I didn't. This is what the teacher wanted, right? And we wanted them to understand how osmosis worked through fish bowls. So here's a story. Watch the science language. I'm going to have you share your thoughts with me in a moment.
Now, we all know and love the story of Finding Nemo. Father and son get separated. Son makes new friends in a fish tank. Father goes on an epic journey to save his only child. And, following the Disney way of life, everyone ends up living happily ever after. But what if there was some dark twist lurking in the shadow of the story? What if the dentist who found our tiny orange friend actually gave Nemo to his crazy niece Darla? She doesn't know about marine life, and instead of putting Nemo into a new and friendly saltwater fish tank, she put Nemo into a freshwater fish bowl. Would it really matter? Saltwater, freshwater, I mean, it's all water, right? Would everything end up happily ever after for our little lost clownfish Nemo? No, no way. So what gives? Why can't you put a saltwater fish into a freshwater tank? Well, fish that live in the ocean, like our little friend Nemo, are happy campers when they're surrounded by water. There's salt inside Nemo's body and outside Nemo's body. And nature likes everything to be balanced. And this is exactly what happens for saltwater fish when they're in a saltwater environment. Because again, there's salt on both sides of Nemo's skin. But when you put a fish like Nemo into fresh water, the conditions around him change. Now, unlike his happy home in the ocean, Nemo has more salt in his body than the fresh water around him. Nature hates that there's more salt on the inside than on the outside and wants to balance this out. Now, if we could look through a microscope at Nemo's body, we would see that there's tiny openings in his skin, kind of like doorways. Now, the salt molecules inside Nemo's body are way too big to fit through these tiny doorways. But water molecules are super small and fit perfectly through them. Only water can move easily in and out of a fish's body. Nature wants everything to even out, and the only way you can balance this is for water to start pouring into Nemo's body. Well, Nemo has so much salt compared to the fresh water surrounding him that the water just keeps coming in his body. With this effect, Nemo may as well have been a blowfish instead of a clownfish because he will swell up like a balloon. Eventually, he'll swell up so much that his cells will start to burst until finally he goes belly up. Poor Nemo. Doesn't really make for a very good Disney ending. This process of water flowing through these tiny doorways is called osmosis, and it's an amazing phenomenon. Don't put Nemo into a freshwater tank. He's a saltwater fish and needs to be surrounded by salt. The most important tip for our fishy friends out there, stay on osmosis's good side.
All right. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. Now, here's the challenge. This teacher had to remove the science language, right? This teacher had to explain every idea as clearly as possible. This is my second mention of my mother, but I asked, my mother asked me, what do I do for a living? And I basically said, I tell teachers to communicate in language that students can understand so that they can understand better. Then once they understand the idea, then introduce them to the language. She was like, that is the dumbest research in the world. That's what you do for a living. And I said, unfortunately, yes. But here's the idea. Why would we do it some other way? If we know that language is complicated, why not offer clear ideas first and then practice using the science language? And so I am a researcher. So we studied this. We did some experiments using this approach. And here's what we found. So for example, took one group, science and everyday language together, meaning we assume that teachers do it. I know people use word walls, people use prefixes and try to make sure you introduce the language first. And so we didn't want to disrespect that people are actually doing this work. And so we came in two groups. The control group is when you do science language and everyday language at the same time. The experimental group is simple everyday language and then teach language later. So both groups were, those are our groupings. Both groups got a pretest. And then one group was taught with language and a new language and new idea at the same time. The other group just got language only, and we gave them both a post-test. And here's what we found, just what it looked like. Here's the science language group. To avoid the impact of teacher skill, we did it online. So these are videos, exact same time on task, exactly the same. So oxygen, carbon dioxide, photons, and water versus good air, all things needed for living air that humans breathe out, water and light, just to make sure the idea was clear first. So what we found is on all measures, students who learned with the language first approach retained information almost at 10% more. If you take a look at the far left, these are our multiple choice items where the average gain was about 58% for those in the control group and about 70% for those in the experimental group. And that is across all items, right? When you ask the question with simpler language, you notice a bigger gap. I want you to take you all the way to the right, open-ended questions. And this is where we found our biggest difference in learning outcomes. So if I just asked them to explain a concept or explain how the stomata plays a role in photosynthesis, you'll notice that those in the experimental group on average gained about 30% in total outcome scores versus only a gain of about 16% for those in the control group. And so what we're seeing is that the retention is much stronger for those who explain scientific ideas or get access initially in everyday language. So we did it again. But this time, this is a different experiment. Same thing, same conditions. One group, science and language at the same time. The other, simple language, different outcome measures. So now given two different measures or stress measures, let me show you what they look like. So I explained, this is a quick explanation, video again, so that we can account for teacher skill. This is evaporation occurs when water changes its shape, right? That is experimental group. Control group. When water evaporates, it expands its bond length and changes to gaseous form. A little bit more complicated here, right? So everyday language is experimental. Control group, science language, heavy. Exact same numbers of words. So we wanted to make sure the numbers of words did not change. The only change was the complicated nature of the words. Now, we gave them these stress tests at the end. So if the word stroop, if the word red is written in red, you push R, right? If the word red is written in green, now that is a cognitive distractor, meaning this, I have to ignore what the word says and look for the color, and those are called incongruent, where the color doesn't match. And so if the word green was written in red, I will push the R button, right? If the word yellow was written in blue, I ignore what it says and I hit the B button. So that is the two types of questions for the Stroop effect. Now, the flanker on the right is a arrow test. So if you take a note, you have to circle and identify the centermost arrow. So you just click a button to match the centermost arrow. And there's two ways this is done. Congruent, meaning the arrows are pointing the exact same way as all those other arrows. It's easier to do. But in this case, the centermost arrow is pointing the opposite direction. So here's what you have to do. You have to ignore the opposite direction arrows and focus. It takes a little bit more time. It's a harder task. If you're stressed out, it becomes even more difficult. So I use these two tests, very simple experiment. You get simple language or complex language, and then I give you these two stress tests, and here's what happened. Those in the treatment group, their mean score, 1,300 milliseconds versus the control group, 1,700 milliseconds, statistically significant, huge effect size. Now, here's what this means, right? Those who were taught with simple language when it was a more difficult task, meaning the colors and words didn't match, were much faster in their capacity to recognize it, right? Those, to get to this quickly, across all measures, we found the same thing. Let's switch to the flanker test, the arrow test. Similarly, for those in the treatment group, 600 milliseconds versus 1,000 milliseconds, and a bigger difference. So that arrow task, it was even a bigger difference. So here's what this means. All you need to do is recognize a color. All you need to do is identify an arrow, but it required more cognitive work. It was more difficult cognitively to make sense of it if you were taught with science language. And here's how I like to explain it. If you've ever parallel parked your car, and your music is up, you're having a great time, and you're parallel parking the car, sometimes you turn the music down. It just enables you to focus, right? You can parallel park with the music up, but you choose to do it without the music. It is the exact same principle, right? The idea is we're literally taking more cognitive space by using complex language. And so I want to get to this. Remember this phone thing? The things we talk about the most are the things we know the most about, right? So why wouldn't we not constantly enable us to use pertinent information? So for example, I want to argue the number that you remember was that I need it in case I get in trouble number. It's mom's number, it's dad, it's big brother, big sister, whoever was going to get you out of the crisis, that's the number you retain to this day. So why are we not teaching science in the context of kids' everyday lives? The things that they see every day are the things that we're retaining. Otherwise, it's harder for them to understand, and it is stressful if we teach with complex language. So here's a simple way to do it. Cognitive apprenticeship lesson planning is what we did at Michigan State. It's what we do at Stanford. How we teach our students is we never teach in a void. This aligns perfectly with NGSS teaching. I'm always going to teach in the context of a problem. So I may say, instead of osmosis, I'm going to teach, well, why would I want to put a freshwater fish in a saltwater tank and vice versa? Modeling. So we assume the students don't know. Lots of opportunities for students to talk and get it wrong, but it's teacher-centered. You're assuming they don't know. You're embedding them with activities that you're part of. Then we switch to coaching, right? You're a personal trainer. The students are carrying the load. They're analyzing data. They're doing experiments and making sense of the phenomena, but you're now helping them correct the information. We're assuming explanatory power. And finally, you get out of the way, fading. Lots of opportunities to explain and using our newly acquired scientific language, so we're mastering new ideas and new practices, right? So you can do this in a culturally relevant way. And so the problem that you might use is a problem that is relevant to your particular community. So if you notice, we talked about fish. Well, if your kids don't have fish bowls, it's an irrelevant lesson. We need to figure out how to embed a community-based problem. You can then tap into communities using parents, family members as community experts to help them understand these science ideas. And then when we switch to coaching, is that our job is now to be a community expert. Instead of internalizing all science teaching as important to the classroom, why wouldn't we develop ideas to teach the community, right? And then the final assessments, instead of being inward assessments, outward assessments. We're having students explain ideas to the community. We're creating vlogs. We're doing things to share our expertise with the world. Now, here's why that is important. The things I talk most about are the things I know most about. Mastery is developed in teaching. So you need to create a context where your students are now the teachers. So here's a quick example, and then I want to make sure we get time for questions. Talk a little bit about technology. So for example, a cognitive apprenticeship approach to osmosis might be, why would it be bad to put a freshwater fish in a freshwater tank, a saltwater tank rather? You can do video activities. You can do a teacher lecture, short reading to give them some access. You can switch to coaching, give a set of activities that help them learn it. And these are lab experiments, building models, students kind of preparing animations, and then you can fade by giving them opportunities to write about this, creating a handout or a newsletter that they can give out at the local pet store or something like that. Here's another culturally relevant way to do it, right? You can teach about carne asada. Anybody ever marinated food? Either it's working or it's not, right? To me, this is osmosis. I want every time they see marinade, they go right back to this idea of this is the story of water and seasoning moving in and out across the membrane, right? I teach it in the context of something that they'll experience, right? So for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep us moving, and then I want to talk to you about the role of technology. A couple things I want to talk about. First, we may not be able to diversify teaching force right now. It's just difficult to find teachers from different backgrounds, right? But our technology can provide rich ideas about science concepts today, right? So as you think about your students and thinking about making sure they can see different aspects of the world, tap into YouTube and the diverse ways that people are communicating. You can diversify your classroom by the technology. I want to talk to you about some ways that you can do this pragmatically in your instruction. Let's talk about changing your essential questions. So instead of going from, let's talk about the generic effects of climate change, let's talk about the specifics of heat islands and how it affects people in local communities and communities across the country. Think about essential questions that really challenge your students to think about how the science is impacting people beyond themselves. Next, formative assessments. If you remember anything from today, I want you to dramatically shift your formative assessment. Create lots of opportunities for your students to explain ideas, and then take those ideas and make sure they're practicing science language and talking about pertinent ideas that are happening in their community, right? Give them practice explaining the concepts in a social context. Action-based summative assessments. At the end of the day, you're not going to remember it anyway unless you give them something to explain that is action-based. Give them an opportunity to get out into the world and explain those ideas in some fundamental ways. So I'm going to say that smartphones are windows to the world. We need to use them as a cultural bridge. What I learned over the last year and a half is that instead of one explanation being possible, well, what do you think about this? And one kid offers an answer. Using the chat, I learned I might get 30 answers. Better yet, using Pear Deck. If I ask the kids, tell me what you think, I get 30 answers. Well, that's an explanation. It's brilliant. Now I can go back and have them revise those. Nearpod offers an incredible way for you to create interactive spaces where your kids are explaining, editing, changing, and talking through these ideas in meaningful ways. And so don't worry about technology being limiting, because your kids are phenomenal at technology. They can teach you the new technologies. I want to close and make sure we have enough time just to say this. I want this to be the first of many conversations. What we're trying to do is to show you how culture and cognition are connected, to make sure when we're teaching, we teach with ideas first, language second, so students become the experts in their own community. So thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
I encourage, this is Maggie from Vermont. I'm encouraging anyone who wants to ask questions or start anything to go ahead and unmute yourselves. We're a strong and small, mighty group of 13 participants. So yeah, let's just start. And I don't want to take up all the time because I've got questions, but I'll hold off. I mean, I know Jennifer Blay in the chat said that she doesn't have questions. It's just very affirming. I have a couple questions, and just maybe the first one. So one of the things that we are tackling with in Vermont is rural poverty. And I'm wondering, and I know that this is my own bias because I was raised in a more of the metro New York area. So I'm not very familiar with like the rural culture and the rural poverty and its associated culture. And I don't know if there's anyone on the call who has experience with this, but I'm wondering specifically how we can invite those students into the conversation with just like that different background, right? So when I'm reading your book, it is based off of urban youth, and I think that's fascinating, but I'm trying to marry it to like the environment that we have up here. And I don't know, any suggestions? And am I making, is it the same approach? Like,
Yeah, good question. So I was an inner city science teacher in Los Angeles. So I don't have expertise in rural communities. But what happened when I wrote this book is many of the teachers that I trained are rural teachers. They teach in impoverished communities. And they're like, you just wrote the wrong title. Like what I am saying is that language is a symbol of intimidation. That doesn't change if you're in a rural community, right? It may be magnified, if anything, because part of, as I mentioned, of community identity is that we talk like the people in our environment. And so the language, it can be a symbol that I don't belong for students who are impoverished and live in extreme rural communities as well. It's exact same phenomena. Secondly, the cognitive piece absolutely does not change, meaning this: if I don't have an opportunity to talk about what is pertinent to me, I'm not going to remember it. And the question is, how are the science ideas of osmosis, of meiosis, of mitosis, right? How are they pertinent to what those kids are going to see on a daily basis? And that's the work that teachers have to do. And an easy way to do it is to do pre-assessments, to say, okay, when we talk about genetics, how does genetics play a role? And for example, there was a student in my dorm who was from a rural community in California, and he was growing he had a hydroponic setup in his dorm. I'm a dorm director. And I was like, no, sir, we are not going to be doing that. And he said, well, no, it's not what you think. I'm growing fruit. I said, okay, I was born on a day, not yesterday, sir. What do you mean you're growing fruit? So he developed a tiered way to grow fruit hydroponically to save space and maximize environments in the case of drought. And it was brilliant, right? But that is a context I don't have no awareness of, because I didn't know what the issues were. So issues of water access were pertinent to his community, and he developed an expertise in how plants grow. It's a photosynthesis lesson if I've ever seen one that is rooted in a particular issue in a particular community, right? The question is, how do I know what my students are interested in? Something.
Something. I think we can hear you now.
All right. Hold on one second. It switched to, I have ear pods, and it said my ear pods were plugged in, and they're not. But anyway, the point is, we want to identify the science phenomena that is most pertinent to them, because that's the thing they're going to see and talk about most. If we really want a depth of understanding, that's what I'm arguing we should do. And the easiest way to do it, to be pragmatic, do a pre-assessment of whatever it is you're going to teach at the unit level, and then you'll understand, number one, what content they know, and number two, what context they might know it in.
I agree with what Brian's saying. Here in Lowell, there's 80 kids in our school, pre-K to 8. We're very small, and language is definitely a barrier because we're high poverty. I think we're about 80% poverty, but the kids have to use the language every day. That's the only way they're gonna. So discussions, using it, but also having them own their own learning. So I think project-based, place-based learning, as he said, is the key piece. So when you do projects or have things going on, that they have the buy-in, it's authentic, they really do rise to the challenge. And when they have the opportunity to share out, then they are using the language, they're owning it. So everything you said today, I was thinking about with, that's what we really try to do, is grab the kids and move their learning forward with those authentic opportunities as much as possible. It doesn't happen for every single, topic you're learning about, but if you have 3 or 4 opportunities like that a year, they're growing exponentially.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that. So I'm at the state level, and what I see occur is a focus on place-based phenomena and engaging phenomena, which is excellent, but I feel like they're missing that extra piece, and it's engaging students in their own cultural language plus that phenomena, that I think that we can really see some difference. Yeah.
Well, I also think I want to make sure that I recognize how hard that is.
Yeah.
Like for us as teachers, first we have to understand it ourselves and be comfortable with it. We're adding a whole new layer, which is to say, I want to understand it in the context of my students' lives, and I may not have that mastery. And I want to make the first argument that is okay, is that our collective developing of a local expertise is a fruitful place to be if we want everybody to really get a depth of understanding, get comfortable. So how do you do it? Start with a pre-assessment so you get context from the kids, and then you can teach those ideas in that context.
A number of us here work with teachers more than we might be working with students. So I'm wondering, in your experience, have there been some things that you have done to help teachers see this move as being necessary?
I don't get a lot of opposition from teachers around it being necessary. Whether or not it's pragmatic is the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah. How do I do it? How do I do it efficiently? Which I totally respect. So the how do I do it? One of the bigger challenges is to say, well, as a discipline, my discipline doesn't allow me to do that, because chemical bonding is chemical bonding. And so a double displacement chemical reaction is not a cultural phenomenon. And I want to make sure I argue for them. Of course it's not. But what double displacement chemical reactions happen in the culture of your kids? And that is a different question. Mm-hmm. And we have to be comfortable saying that is the goal, to go from I'm not really sure as a teacher where the pedagogical content lies, to saying let's do this together. It has to happen as a collective. One of the things I know about science teachers, particularly people who really are teaching biochemistry, physics, you're doing AP, is your depth of science knowledge is as thorough as anyone else's, because I meet world-class physicists, but they're not generalists, right? They know very specifically one idea, and the task of what I'm arguing we do is to go deep. Now, here's the challenge. I need to build an environment where teachers grow comfortable and get better and more skilled at doing that work. When I do it with my pre-service teachers, it becomes, it's their first experience, they're more open to it. When they become in-service teachers, the conversation shifts, and here's a shift. How can I take pre-existing curriculum materials and edit them to meet this need? And that is really where we've been for the last year. I don't need you to generate anything. I need you to be able to tweak existing curriculum materials and make them relevant to your students. That is the actual skill.
I guess to reinforce what you're saying is we're asking our students to be able to think and talk in 2 different sets of languages, and we need to teach ourselves the skill to do the same thing, to be able to, and it also addresses the same kind of public kind of comment where scientists and the public do not see eye to eye, and they're in the public, they're suspicious of scientists because they haven't been able to speak their language. And I think that's, some of the same kind of issues.
That is so well said. And I think I always want to make sure I'm not accusing science teachers of doing anything wrong. What I am arguing is that a better version of what we're doing is to really not allow this to be a hidden issue in our teaching and learning. So if we really know, we all know how language learning works, but are we teaching in a way that does that? So for example, you mentioned, I think very wisely here, that the public discourse and distrust of scientists is about how the scientists communicate. So I spend a lot of time, more time talking to scientists than I do science teachers, suggesting if you really wanted people to understand, then why wouldn't you use language that they can understand? So the logic of using language that only you can understand is a broken logic. Now, here's where it works. It works among us. So as scientists, it helps us communicate efficiently to use scientific language, but that is not always the goal. A lot of times the goal is to inform people who otherwise are not going to read journals, who don't read and participate in the scientific community. So what we need to do first is recognize that there's a better way to do it, and that is to be as clear as possible. And then here's what happens. I need to affirm young people to say it is okay to start from a place where I don't really understand the language. It shouldn't be a symbol of your intelligence. What other discipline, think about it. What other discipline, if a person doesn't do well, you're just like, okay, they're just not smart enough, right? You never hear that in English. Well, they're just not smart enough for English, right? We somehow as scientists are quite comfortable saying, well, if you're smart, you can do science. Just not smart enough for science. Like, this is a peculiar way to think about the world, as opposed to saying, if they don't understand, it's because I didn't communicate it clearly enough. And I think that subtle shift in paradigm is an important one for all of us to take.
It's also thinking in regards to, how we see student learning, having students, giving them the ability, like that young man who was explaining the baseball. But it really also makes us have to rethink all of our assessments. It's very interesting. I came in with this like, oh, this is just going to be science and language. And now I'm walking away with like, no, it's science and language and assessment and, the phenomena. And it's all of this like larger pedagogy that I remember being in the classroom and teaching like convection currents. And I remember students being like, it's the thing that goes like this. And I'm like, I know that you get it. When you're doing this, I know that you get it. Let me just give you the language. And it's just like, I know there are educators that just get so married to that science language. And it's a hard shift if you're not into that growth mindset. A lot of them are, most of them are, but there are some where you're like, ooh, that they know.
Yeah, there's a huge cultural shift that I think has to happen, and it's not just language. I think it's assessment broadly. You all have the student who knows very well, does well in the test because they know the ideas. They're just not going to turn in 3 homework assignments, right? And if you turn them in late, you're like, well, I got to penalize you because the rest of the kids turned it in on time. So you're losing 40 points, right? It ends up being the 10% that you need. The difference between an A and a B. And here's the kid who knows all the content, who has a B, not because they don't understand, but because they're unorganized. So are we really assessing the organizational skills of young people, or whether or not they've learned the physics that we're teaching, right? And so, yeah, I'm making the point, we got to question our assumptions, right? We adopted a bunch of assumptions without really breaking them apart. And I want to just deal with the language piece to say, all right, you know enough about language to make sure that all of your young people are comfortable in the learning environment, and that they can develop expertise. So let's break it apart and we'll be fine.
Awesome. Well, I do want to thank you on behalf of the Vermont Science Teaching Association. It is 4:32. I am going to stop the recording, but I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of everyone here and for giving us your time and your expertise and moving our thinking forward. And yeah, and to, John Olson had said that you are the great bookend for what we started with, which was Dr. Oki Lee. And it was just the perfect week. So thank you very much. And, everyone enjoy their weekend. And if you're in the Northeast like I am, I'm sorry it's so cold. Because it is hella chilly outside right now. I think this morning I woke up and it was -6, and I'm in the balmy Champlain Valley of Vermont. I had a colleague that said it was -25 over there. Jennifer Blythe says right now it's -18. So
Oh,
yeah.
I'm not gonna tell you that